Welcome to Global View, where we explore the most pressing topics shaping our world, from politics to global security and beyond. Today, we are diving into one of the most intriguing and controversial subjects of our time, UFOs and government disclosure. And who better to guide us in this discussion than our esteemed guest, Nick Pope. Nick Pope served in the UK Ministry of Defense, where he investigated UFO sightings to determine their potential threat to national security. Since then, he has become one of the world's leading voices on UFO phenomena, government transparency, and what these unidentified aerial objects might mean for humanity. Nick, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me on.
I would like start with a question that has always been my curiosity. In your view, why do governments, whether in UK or in United States, continues to be so secretive about UFOs? Is that truly a matter of national security, or is there anything else?
I think there are probably three different reasons here. One is, I think you could say that governments and particularly defense ministries are inherently secretive about almost anything, even when there's no need to be. I think people overclassify a lot of information. I think the second factor is that nobody likes to admit that there might be something in our airspace that's unidentified, particularly when the evidence shows, in terms of things like radar data and satellite data, that these things are often more speedy, maneuverable than any of our military jet aircraft. And I think the third thing is, if anyone is thinking, as some governments do, what if any of this is extraterrestrial? There is the thought that you don't want to say much about it, because what if an adversary gets to it ahead of you and then acquires that technology? So I think all those reasons play into each other.
Nick, there's one thing that President Trump has been very successive regarding and stable, and that is declassification, government accountability, and transparency. From his first term to his now current term, he's sought to have as much information regarding government secrets or corruption exposed to the American people and to the global community. He's decided to now declassify JFK files, Martin Luther King files, and also UFO files. So the question I have is, why do you think that President Trump decided to declassify the UFO files with those other two massive government secrets, if you will?
Well, I think, yes, absolutely. His instincts are for a smaller government, a more efficient government, less fraud, less waste, less corruption. And we've seen this. We've seen this, for example, in the way that he's brought Elon Musk into the government with the Department of Government Efficiency. And I think part of a smaller government, and a government that's more truly representative of the people, is a government that is truly accountable to the people. And so President Trump's instincts, I think, are against the sort of inertia that you see with the bureaucracy, the civil service, the deep state gatekeepers. And he also, of course, has the popular touch. I mean, he's a populist president. He knows that there's a huge amount of public interest in this. And he knows that whether it's JFK or UFOs, that people are suspicious that there has been a cover-up and a conspiracy, and they want to know the answers. And I think the president agrees with that, which is why we've seen these statements and indeed these initiatives in the last few days.
That's really interesting to see how, actually, talking about disclosure and the classification of these files. Well, if you had access to unclassified information of any country, what would you be the first thing you would look for when it comes to understanding, first and foremost, why this form of extraterritorial being are visiting planet Earth, and which would be their main purpose?
Well, the first thing I would want to know is if any nation, I mean, we know that lots of different countries, allies, adversaries, lots of countries have programs looking at this subject. But what I would want to know is, does anyone actually have a smoking gun? Are there, for example, pieces of physical evidence? It's been claimed, for example, that there have been some crashes. And this isn't just anonymous hearsay evidence on the internet. People have testified under oath to Congress about this. And when I say people, I'm talking about intelligence community officials who have verifiably worked on this. And they have said that there is material, and maybe, not just wreckage, but also the term biologics has been used. So that's what I would want to know. And of course, it's a yes or no answer to that, because either this is true or it's not. There's no halfway house with something like this. So, of course, in the last few days, just literally last week, of course, we had this announcement that the House Oversight Committee was setting up this task force on the declassification of federal secrets, which will look at UFOs. I think they're going to do JFK first, but of course they wouldn't be doing this if they didn't have the very strong statements from President Trump saying that he supported the release of this information. Now, whether President Trump is going to need to issue another executive order specifically on UAP, I don't know, but we'll have to see whether there is any resistance to his initiatives and any resistance to this new body that Representative Anna Paulina Luna is going to be heading up.
Well, actually, precisely on this point, some argue that UFOs could represent foreign adversaries testing advanced technologies. Now, how do we distinguish between extraterritorial and human-made crafts?
Well, it's a very good question, and it's a very important question. And of course, I should say at the outset that these two theories are not mutually exclusive. So it's perfectly possible that some UAP activity is attributable to an adversary, and some might be extraterrestrial. Now, fortunately, there is a way to tell very quickly and actually quite easily using standard scientific tests. There is something called isotopic ratio analysis, which enables you to take any material and you can tell whether or not it's been in space. Because, for example, if something is just terrestrial, we here are protected by virtue of the atmosphere from harmful cosmic rays. So the ratios of the different isotopes of different elements that make up all matter will, as it were, what you'll get is almost like a chemical fingerprint. And so a combination of that and also some other tests that look at the structure of material, X-ray diffraction studies, those two things taken together we'll be able to tell. But of course, without wanting to be too flippant about it, I mean, if somebody literally has an extraterrestrial spacecraft, I mean, I think that's orders of magnitude above and beyond just a faster, better aeroplane. So if you forgive me for almost joking, it should be obvious if you just look at the thing. If these rumors are true, that somebody somewhere has got one or more of these things hidden away in an Air Force hangar somewhere.
That's very interesting. So, following up on your description of the various differences between something that would emanate from outer space versus something that would be man-made, the question I have is, in order for it to be man-made, would that require assistance from extraterrestrials, or do humans have an innate capability to create this type of high-tech technology that some people would describe as UFOs or different radar systems that have, that are much more sophisticated than other countries. So are aliens helping us build these things, or do we have an innate ability to build them on our own, or a combination of two?
Again, it could be a combination of the two because humans are obviously pretty smart.
Yeah.
We have, whatever people think of it, we've developed nuclear weapons. We've built spacecraft that have taken people to the moon. They've landed on Mars. Five space probes that have been designed are going to be leaving or are in the process of leaving the solar system. So we are pretty smart. We have great scientists and great engineers. That doesn't mean that some of these incidents aren't extraterrestrial, and it doesn't mean, again, some people who have been involved in some of these programs absolutely allege that not only have there been crashes, but there have been attempts, which is kind of common sense, really. Of course, we'd want to figure out how these things work, and people say yes, there have been attempts to so-called reverse engineer these things. Many people believe that a UFO crashed in Roswell in
Mm-hmm.
1947.
Yes.
Well, if that's true, we've had nearly 80 years to try and figure it out and build some ourselves. And maybe we've had some success. Again, that's the question that a lot of people are asking. And when the American people have these sorts of questions, President Trump's second term is saying, well, yeah, I recognize that. There's a lot of public interest. There's a lot of concern if there has been overclassification and secrecy, and let's get the information out there to the American people.
Well, you mentioned the Roswell case, which actually is one of the most famous cases you investigated. What made this case so special when we think about other people reporting of craft crash and other sort of evidence that would make suspect that this was extraterrestrial beings?
I think the thing that really made this so special is that, in a sense, this was the ground zero
Mm.
of the UFO phenomenon. And of course, in 1947, we didn't have the term UFO. We didn't have groups of people, whether they were in the government or private citizens doing this as an interest. We didn't have what you might call UFO programs in government, a UFO community amongst citizens. So we started with a blank sheet of paper, and people are generally not aware that this was actually happening right at the beginning of all this. This was not a case of the military at the beginning covering it up, because the military were the first ones to announce that they had recovered a so-called flying disc. There had been a few sightings around the United States for about a week or two since June the 24th, 1947. And then in early July, the US Army Air Force, which was the body that predated the US Air Force, which didn't exist in 47,
Mhm.
said, we have recovered one of these mysterious flying discs. So they were the ones that said so. Now, within 24 hours, they changed their story and said that it had just been a weather balloon. These people who recovered this, they were the only atomic bomb capable squadron anywhere in the world at the time. So this military unit was the most elite military unit. These people do not see a weather balloon, which they were very familiar with, and mistake it for something truly out of this world.
Roswell certainly is ingrained in modern history as one of the first contacts, if you will, with something that was extraterrestrial. But let's look back millennia. For millennia, in various religious texts, there has been some sort of evidence that humanoids or humans have made contact with beings in the sky, these greater divinities, and these are referenced in Middle Eastern texts, Asian texts, potentially even in the Bible itself. So the question I have is the contact that humans made at Roswell, if that was indeed an alien contact, which I believe it was, and especially how you just described it, are these the same type of alien figures that ancient people made contact with that have been referenced in ancient texts, or has there been a different evolution of these entities from 2 millennia ago to the current day?
Well, I suppose that if we share this universe with other civilizations, it's extremely unlikely that there'll just be one other civilization in the cosmos. So it's perfectly possible that we've been visited by multiple civilizations. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, in ancient religious texts, in folklore that we see from all around the world, we've always interacted with a whole pantheon of gods, devils, angels, demons. The Bible talks about fiery chariots. Ancient Hindu texts talk about war in heaven. And we have often placed our gods in the sky, and many times there are stories of gods or angels coming down, imparting knowledge to our ancestors. And of course, it's from a common sense point of view. If that happened, our ancestors wouldn't have had words like UFO or extraterrestrial. They would have perceived these visitors as gods and messengers of gods, and they would have perhaps worshipped them and built monuments in honor of these visits to commemorate them. And of course, this is exactly what happens. And ancient astronaut theorists on TV shows like Ancient Aliens claim that that's exactly what's happened in our past many, many times all around the world in a remarkably cross-cultural way.
Well, that's so interesting. And actually, you mentioned that today we have access to biological, for example, testing. Is there a way we can reconstruct what these beings really looks like? We know they're drawing on the pyramids in Giza, but also in Mexico, that they portray them as big heads or with some sort of tool for traveling in space on their head.
The Greys.
The Greys. Do you think we have an idea if they could just look like us or something different to adapt to the planet they come from? So is there a way to reconstruct them?
You could certainly imagine a sort of convergent evolution being a sort of real thing in the universe. And because the human body is a pretty good design and seems adapted to a lot of things, you know, we're mobile, we have opposable thumbs, so we can use tools, we can build things, and so again, in this infinite universe in which we live, it's perfectly possible that there are many humanoid entities and that extraterrestrials look humanoid. And sure, if you look at, again, everything from ancient cave drawings and petroglyphs to some of the Egyptian hieroglyphs, you can see this idea of essentially humanoid entities. And again, it always strikes me that in a universe nearly 14 billion years old, there might be civilizations out there 1 million years ahead of us, 1 billion years ahead of us even. And what might they look like to us? Well, I think they would be indistinguishable from gods, and their technology would be indistinguishable from magic.
Very interesting.
That's very interesting.
Very interesting.
Wow.
Nick, many people look at the pyramids of Giza, various temples around the world, other pyramids in South America, and they say with current technology, we could not have constructed those the way that they did millennia ago, or even 1,000 years ago, or even 700 years ago. So people theorize that we have been given help or assistance by extraterrestrials. First, do you believe that extraterrestrials have made contact with certain humans in order to pass along information or knowledge that would result in this advanced technology and these pyramids and the current AI drive that we have? And second, if that's indeed true, what is the end result for the aliens and us? What are they giving us this knowledge for? What do they want from us?
Well, that's the $64,000 question. I sometimes think, and of course, when we talk about the pyramids, we are making new discoveries all the time. There are still many people who believe that, for example, there's a lost hall of records under the Sphinx.
Mhm.
And you've seen, I'm sure, those little robots that they occasionally send up some of the little shafts in certainly in the Great Pyramid. And many people believe that there are still hidden chambers in the
Mhm.
pyramids that we have yet to discover. And then, of course, you've got to figure that all around the world, a lot of, I mean, sometimes entire cities just get grown over. You find every now and then scientists and archaeologists talk about finding cities in the jungle in Central and South America, some cities probably in the desert, completely under the sand, some because of rising sea levels, now lost to us. So you wonder what else might be out there waiting to be discovered. Um, as to what the agenda is, yeah, absolutely. I think, again, there's a certain logic that if we're being visited, these entities would seek out
Yeah.
enlightened individuals, intelligent people, people, visionaries. People talk about people like Leonardo da Vinci, somebody in history who seemed centuries ahead of his time. I mean, Leonardo da Vinci, for example, in his sketches, had designs for a prototype helicopter. Well, did this come from the genius of Leonardo, or did it come from somewhere else? I don't know, but these are the questions that if we really want to know the true story of human history, we should be asking. And I think one other thing I would say is that asking what it's all about. I think the most logical thing is that if we're being visited, they're coming here as scientists, as explorers, and perhaps as anthropologists, because again, to civilizations millions of years ahead of us, we're not going to have anything to teach them about science or engineering, but they might be interested in just humanity in terms of our social structures. So the sorts of things that an anthropologist would be interested in, our society, our political systems, our religious beliefs, that sort of thing.
That would be interesting to know the report on our crazy humankind one day.
It might be sad to say our report card, if that's what it is, might be an F because of some of the things that we're doing here.
I agree. A counterexample, not to follow. So, precisely watching shows like Ancient Aliens, I was very fascinated into the witnesses of these people who claims that they were kidnapped by aliens and took away for some time, where their body was studied basically for anthropological reasons, just to understand our race from the biological aspect, and then of course social aspect as well, as you mentioned. Do you believe these witnesses are valuable and credible sources to be included in the research about UFOs, or do you think they're not credible?
It's more difficult than UFOs because with UFOs, of course, we've got satellite data, we've got films from forward-looking infrared cameras mounted on military jets that have chased these things. We've got satellite information. The former director of national intelligence, John Ratcliffe, who's now, of course, CIA director, gave an interview on Fox News 2 or 3 years ago where he revealed that there was satellite imagery of UAP. So that's good, hard data. It is more difficult with these people that claim that they've been taken, and we do need to do some proper scientific studies. But for anyone who says it sounds crazy, I mean, just I'll give an analogy. Imagine if you were, I don't know, part of a pride of lions in the Serengeti, and one day you said that you saw these strange entities, and they shot you with something, and you passed out, and they tagged you, and then they put you back. And it sounds crazy, but that lion would be describing exactly what our
Yes.
scientists do. You shoot something with a tranquilizer gun, you put a subdermal tag or tracker device on it so that you can follow it. You maybe take some blood samples, and you then release it back into the wild. Well, in a way, I'm kind of making a joke of it, but
That's
in a
true.
way, that's exactly what these people report.
Makes sense.
We've spoken about outer space and technology on land or in our atmosphere. Let's move to the ocean. They say that around 3% of our entire oceans have only been discovered or even explored. Maybe it could even be less than that. Recently, there have been members of Congress that have described massive moving uh, vehicles of some sorts deep under the oceans. Do you think it's possible that extraterrestrials do have bases under in the oceans? And if yes, would that be easier to explore than these efforts to go into Mars, the moon, and beyond our atmosphere?
Well, you're right, of course, and it's true that we know less about the deep ocean than
Mhm.
we know about the surface of the moon or Mars. And
Interesting.
I think it would be very difficult for us, and maybe that's the reason, because of course, it's pitch black. The pressures would immediately crush all but the most strong probes, and of course, we've seen some tragedies with submersibles not being able to withstand the incredible pressures down there. And I think it was interesting, again, when Anna Paulina Luna, together with James Comer, gave that press conference about the new task force on the declassification of federal secrets. And when she was listing the subjects, like JFK, like
Mhm.
COVID origins, like the Epstein client list, in parallel with UAP, she specifically mentioned USOs, unidentified submerged or submersible
Mm.
objects. And this was absolutely a reference to these cases. And these are amongst the most highly classified cases in the US government, of course, because few things are more sensitive than some unknown technology tracking our ballistic missile submarines. And yet, that's exactly what's happened. And some of these submariners talk about these objects performing incredible speeds and maneuvers and accelerations under the ocean. And that's incidentally why one of the other reasons people were surprised in the last few years when all this UAP information came out. And people were saying, well, I thought this was the Air Force leading it. And why is so much of this about the Navy? And
Indeed.
for years, there'd been rumors that it was
True.
the Navy that had the lead on this, and that seems to be the way. The former head of the UAP task force, Jay Stratton, was a career intelligence officer, but specializing in naval affairs. So this is very significant, I think.
It is, and they definitely found us and are observing us for a long while. Now, in the meantime, we also reach a level of technological evolution, and we see Elon Musk throwing rocket into space exploration. How close we are to find them, to find any sign of life in the space?
Well, it sounds very impressive. And of course, Elon Musk is doing a great job, not just with Doge, but with SpaceX
Yes.
and Tesla and things. But let's put that into perspective. Even at the fastest speed that one of those space probes that I mentioned, like the Voyager probe,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
even at the speed that those probes are going, it would take about 70,000 years to reach the nearest star aside from our sun. So sure, we can travel to the moon and Mars, and that's going to be very difficult, but we are a long, long way away from anything close to viable interstellar travel. That is going to take a technological leap that is very difficult to conceive of at the moment. We're going to somehow need to develop something that almost sounds like it comes from science fiction, a faster than light drive.
This would explain why they are not openly communicating with us, at last, as far as we know. I think we are too primitive still for them. Might be one reason.
To a civilization that has that sort of technology, we might be like an anthill.
Yeah. Well, they could educate us, but I think the gap is too big. So it might most likely perceived as magic, or whoever even talked about them today is questioned, right? So we are too far away from probably this type of understanding.
Nick, we're making contact. We've been to the moon. Elon Musk now wants to bring us to Mars. Why? And why should humanity want to discover Mars? That's the first question. And the second question is, should humanity go back to the moon? If yes, and if not, why not?
We definitely should go back to the moon, but the moon in one way should just be a stepping stone to Mars and then beyond. Because Elon Musk is right. At the moment, humanity has all its eggs in one basket here on planet Earth. So if we were to have any sort of global catastrophe that would pose an extinction level event threat to humankind, whether that's nuclear war, whether that's a deadly pandemic of some sort, whether it's AI suddenly getting out of control. It doesn't matter what it is. If it's the impact of a very big meteorite or comet, it doesn't matter. If we're all just here on planet Earth, one event like that and the human race is gone. So we need to become multi-planetary so that if we do have an asteroid strike, like on the scale of the one that wiped out the dinosaurs here on Earth, humanity can survive on Mars. And of course, eventually our sun will expand and it will become a red giant. So we're going to need to move at some stage anyway. But if we should do it as soon as we possibly can. So I think Elon Musk is a visionary when he talks about the need to do this. We need to do it in our lifetimes. This needs to be the generation that does this. But ultimately, we will need to go interstellar. And that, as I say, requires an understanding of science and engineering prowess that we are not remotely close to at the moment, unfortunately.
Science and engineering are absolutely paramount to this type of exploration. However, the human body is limited. We are biomaterial, and some would even argue that gravity alone on Earth is not suitable for our own bodies. That's why people have so many diseases. Some die young, some are older. I mean, so it almost seems that our current state on planet Earth is not even really ideal for a living condition. In order to get to Mars in our current state, one, is that even possible? Or two, would we need to merge ourselves with some sort of robotics, AI, and become a different type of humanoid in order to achieve this inter-galaxy travel that you're talking about here?
Getting to Mars is probably just about possible in terms of physiology and indeed psychology. Though, of course, the long-term effects of zero gravity or low gravity will have very real effects on the human body, on bone structure. For example, you've seen the footage, I'm sure, of astronauts coming back to Earth after long stays on the International Space Station, and they can't walk. So they have to be supported. So these are big challenges. there may be some workarounds, but I think you're right. It may well be that, particularly for interstellar travel, we have to think about things like human modification, upgrading. Now, whether that's gene editing with something like CRISPR, or whether it's something even more radical, like eventually transhumanism, so that we merge the concept of humans and machines. And ultimately, yes, one of the big question marks is how AI is going to fit into this.
Indeed.
And I mean, some people even talk about this is difficult because we don't even really understand the true nature of human consciousness. But some people are talking about, could we somehow, if we could understand what that is, and if it's something tangible, could we download that consciousness into, for example, a very strong robot that wouldn't need oxygen and nitrogen? It could operate in the vacuum of space. It could operate under different gravitational systems. Are we going to merge with AI, or is AI going to take over and supplant humans? I mean, I don't know. Hopefully, we can find a way to coexist, and hopefully, it will benefit both parties. But there's no getting away from the fact that it increasingly looks as if in the next few years and decades, we will be sharing this planet with another super intelligence that might in some ways surpass us. We're going to have to figure out how to deal with that.
And this is so timely. We are really living through this process, and we're really facing the challenges of AI sometimes, right? We can't even distinguish what's real, what's not, and regardless how this will affect even the research about the UFOs. But most importantly, when we look ahead, how this concept of immortality almost that AI is start to actually introduce into the human brain, humankind, how this will be compatible with our concept of spirituality and religion, how we conceived it today, how this will affect spiritual wise the human consciousness.
The short answer is that nobody knows. Some of the world's religions are beginning to think about the possibility of how they would incorporate extraterrestrials into their existing doctrine. The Catholic Church, for example, has already issued some statements to say that there would be no doctrinal objection to this because, as one of the senior clerics put it, man may place no creative limits upon God. So that's one aspect of it, but nobody really knows. And with AI, I think this is a related but separate question, because you could argue that we have ourselves created AI and maybe given it life. So to some extent, you could argue that if AI ever becomes sentient, well, some people think it already has, or that it might be very close, is that AI going to worship us as its creator? Or is it very quickly going to figure out that it's smarter than its creator because it's evolved so quickly beyond? And these are massive questions that we simply don't have answers for. But it just shows why we should forget thinking about all this in terms of science fiction and conspiracy theory. We need to realize that this is the new reality. And these are questions that are very real, and they're going to have real world effects on all of us over the next few years.
Absolutely. And it's very fascinating to think about what the history will tell. Will we be gods or just sort of a primitive form of Big Bang, like how it will be placed? But the idea that we could create store our consciousness, it brings in the concept of immortality. What if we can just translate our entire life experience and our spiritual beings into a machine that allow us to survive beyond the biological time of human body. That's really something that, of course, there's no answer for that. But I guess if any of these aliens that visit planet Earth already evolved into this type of humanoid, or not humanity, of course, but being.
Yes, it's perfectly possible. And then even if it's a biological body, then when something is injured or gets a disease or just ages, maybe they can replace that part with a new one. And again, maybe you can edit the genes as we are beginning to do to slow or maybe even halt or perhaps reverse the aging process. But particularly if we move beyond just biological bodies and we do either have a hybrid of human and machine, like a cyborg, or if we do figure out a way to download our consciousness into the cloud, into supercomputers, and then make replicas so that even if there's an accident, there will be a copy. Then who knows? Maybe that's immortality of a sort. But then you would face the opposite problem. You might want to live to be 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000, but what about 1 billion or 1 trillion or 100 trillion? Eventually, you would probably be desperate just for it to
Switched
end.
off.
So
Yes.
maybe that's the ultimate fate, that we achieve immortality and then we try to
Die again.
undo it. Yes. Like the Pinocchio story. We
Yeah.
at the end of it all, we just maybe want to be human again.
Yes. Totally.
This entire process that you've laid out here seems to be designed for the inevitable first contact. The grand big first contact. Let's say where, like in the movies, the extraterrestrials make contact, they extend their hand, they make their first contact with the president of the United States or somebody at the United Nations. So the question I have is humanity ready for that first contact? And secondly, what does day one post-contact look like for the world?
I don't know if we're ready. It kind of depends on what the truth is that's going to be revealed. If it's just that there are other civilizations out there and some of them are maybe like us, but a bit more advanced, but started in pretty much the same way we did, then I think we could handle that. But what if there is what I sometimes call a truth too terrible to be told about this? What if it's something deeply unsettling to us? What if they say, for example, we made you? Or what if they say this entire universe is a simulation, which is just a little science project and it's failed and we're going to pull the plug? That would be more difficult. So the answer to your question is it depends what truth there is that's going to be revealed. But if it's a more straightforward truth that there are just other civilizations in the universe, then I think day one would be President Trump in the Oval Office saying, my fellow Americans, people of the world, we are not alone. And then everything will follow from that. But yeah, day one would look like that. But day two, we're going to have to figure out, day 2, 3, 4, that every aspect of our society will be deeply and profoundly touched by this and maybe changed by it. Politics, religion, science, technology, the economy, philosophy, almost every aspect of our lives as individuals, and of course on the macro scale, countries, and indeed humanity itself will all be touched by this and changed by it.
So they could bring us some information along the lines of what we saw in the movie Prometheus and The Matrix. So that's a bit of both type of details that might have some humans like what they have to say or to rebel against what they say. Regarding if they came and said, we created you, how would that fit into biblical or religious texts regarding them saying that, does that make them God, or is there a God above them that created them? How do you think people would react to exactly that? I mean, would they say that these are the gods that some in the biblical text had referenced, or that they might be fallen angels, demonic presences? Because there's a lot of people that believe that these aren't even extraterrestrials, or these aren't military vehicles, but these might be some sort of interdimensional demonic figures. Do you think that there is an element of truth to any of that, or do you think it's simply beings from outer space that will come down and probably give some information the way you just described?
Well, again, these concepts are not mutually exclusive. So it's perfectly possible to imagine a world where we have extraterrestrial visitation, but we also have time travelers from the future. We have something from other dimensions. Again, a few years ago, that would have been regarded as science fiction, but now theoretical physicists are talking about this possibly being a reality, and they're looking for it using particle accelerators like the Large Hadron Collider. And some people, yeah, absolutely think that it's demonic. I think if this happened, there would be three schools of thought. There'd be one group of people who simply wouldn't believe it, and they would say this is all some, sinister government psychological operation. This is all done with Hollywood special effects, and none of this is real. So some people just wouldn't believe it. A second group of people would say, yes, these are our gods, and these are the gods of old. They've returned, and that's it. But other people of religious faith would probably say, well, even if that's true, and these extraterrestrials created humanity in a science experiment, who created those extraterrestrials? And religious people will say, of course, that was God. So none of this rules out, even if they created us, it doesn't destroy that religious faith. And of course, that I mentioned that some of the world's religions are beginning to think about this. This is why they're beginning to think about it, because I think they know that this might be something they have to deal with in a few years' time.
Indeed.
Indeed, it all seems like what we are capable at our stage of humanity to afford to learn, if ever anything was revealed by an alien or from this declassified, still classified information. Now, do you believe that the reason why there is so much secrecy and so many classified information about UFOs and extraterritorial life is because we are simply not ready to learn?
That could be part of it. And of course, just as chimpanzees or ants don't understand quantum physics, there may be things that, however smart we think we are, that we can't understand. Things that we don't have the words for, things that we don't even have the brain power to get our heads around. I mean, again, go back to that thought that there might be civilizations out there a billion years ahead of us. We couldn't understand that. If you sent your smartphone back, 50 years in time, they'd struggle to work out what it was. If you sent it back 10,000 years in time to the Stone Age, they'd just think it was a magic, flat, shiny rock.
Yes.
So there may be things that at present are completely beyond our understanding. And if we could figure them out, though, I don't know. The nation on Earth that first does figure out extraterrestrial technology, if that's what we're dealing with, is going to be the dominant force on this planet for the foreseeable future. So that, again, going back to your question about the secrecy, I think is maybe why, whether it's the United States, whether it's Russia, whether it's China, doesn't matter who it is, but you can imagine all these nations saying to themselves, we want that technology.
This definitely puts everything in perspective. And thanks so much for this incredibly fascinating conversation. It was an incredible honor to have you on Global View. And we look forward to following your work, where people can find you.
My website is nickpope.net, but the social media platform on which I'm most active is X, formerly Twitter, and my handle there is at Nick Pope MOD. MOD, of course, for Ministry of Defense. So at Nick Pope MOD, and I try to post something at least once a day, and I do try to interact with people and answer.
Thank you so much. We'll be following you and your incredible work, and hopefully have you back on Global View.